crime prevention. Okay, let's get started for our 44th Security Thought Leadership webinar. And this is what we've been doing every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. We've been engaging in debates about some issue of relevance to the security world. The idea being, and the purpose of thought leadership, by critiquing what goes on today, we get a better type of response in the future. And today's topic is one that has been emanated from previous webinars, when the whole subject of financial criminals running amok because of the crisis has been at the forefront of people's attention. And we're going to be looking today about how we should be responding. And of course, I'm very grateful to Altia-ABM for once again supporting a webinar focused on financial crime. In a minute, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask our four panelists, each of whom will be well known to those in the broader world of economic crime, to introduce themselves. And once each of them have introduced themselves, I will then invite each of them to make an opening statement. Once they've done that, I will then come to you, the audience, and invite you to ask a question. Can I ask you to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, please? Because that's the one we can see here. Okay, well, as you know on these, we move fast. So without further ado, let me introduce the panel. Nick, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi there, everyone. I'm Nick Downing. I'm the Chief Intelligence Officer at CIFAS, the UK's leading fraud prevention service, and previously was a senior police officer for 30 years with a specialism in economic crime. That's me.
Thank you very much indeed. Susan.
Hello everybody, I'm Sue Frith. I am the Chief Exec of the NHS Counter Fraud Authority. We're a special health authority and our remit is to tackle fraud in the NHS. We work directly to the Department of Health as an arm's length body.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan. To Mike.
I'm Michael Levy and I'm Professor of Criminology at Cardiff, and I've worked on economic crime since my PhD on bankruptcy fraud in 1972.
Thank you very much. Sorry, carry on.
Before computers were invented.
Thank you very much indeed. And finally, Mick.
I'm Martin. Morning, afternoon, everyone. Mick Creedon. I was a chief police officer for many years. I was the national lead for organised crime and financial crime in the UK. I am involved with a number of universities in this country and also with Altia-ABM, who are the sponsors for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mick. Right, let's now go to our panel, invite them to make an opening statement. This is 3 minutes when they get their chance to say what they think about this topic. Nick, your opening statement, please.
Yeah, so the scale of the threat, this is massive. It's the largest volume crime in the UK and I'll suggest across the world. It's growing exponentially, but we don't actually know how far and how big, because it's still underreported. Until we change people's attitude towards fraud and recognise it as a risk across government, business and consumers, we're never going to know, because it's not treated as a priority. Approaches, well, during COVID, what we've seen is the fraudsters divert from their regular ways to exploiting any given opportunity. So whether it's a government email or text that will be spoofed, and suddenly the fraudsters will make hay. They're looking at job boards, fraudulent CVs, they've attacked Zoom. They look at us all vulnerable because we're working from home, and the insider threats, you name it, they're trying it. And actually, I often think if they actually put their time and effort into doing good, we will be in a much better place as a society. It's got to change. You know, we've got to change as well as a community our attitude to this and stop the victim blaming. We always look at someone who's been the victim of fraud as almost being stupid or silly. That is wrong. They've been exploited. And I talk about vulnerability as well. Following COVID and the economic downturn, we are all vulnerable. The amount of people losing their jobs, you send them a message offering them a quick buck here and there, they're going to be looking at that. They're going to be thinking how they can take that, whether it's a new job opportunity, whether they've won the lottery. This is a fraudster's playground. The only people who aren't going to make money during this, or the only people who are going to benefit from this economic downturn, will be the criminals. And that leads on to the third point, routes to better policing. Well, it's not just policing, it's all of us. It's the public, private sector coming together. It's actually working as one, stop the ridiculous barriers that exist around information sharing, and actually let's get that full picture. Let's then actually mitigate the threat and prevent and protect the public. So they're my initial thoughts, Martin.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Very, very helpful. Let's move quickly to Susan. Susan, your opening statement, please.
Right, well, I'm not sure I would describe it as running amok, because I think we have got some efforts in there to try and stop fraud. But yes, it's happening. We know it's happening. We know from other crisis situations, Grenfell Fire, for example, that you find out this almost straight away. But often it is a hidden crime, so you don't find out the extent of the problem until a little bit further down the line. Reports on COVID-related fraud in health have been quite low. But we know generally the picture of our estimates of fraud across the NHS annually are over £1 billion. So, and that's outside of a crisis. And I agree with my colleague that we know it's happening, we know it's growing, and we know that fraudsters are taking advantage. It's a bit of a challenge in healthcare generally, because as you can imagine, during the pandemic, and we're still coming out of that, and there's still a lot of focus on healthcare, quite rightly, and focusing everybody on dealing with the health related issues, dealing with fast procurement, getting everything in place to deliver healthcare and make sure the patients are safe. But actually turning people's attention to the fact that there's a massive risk involved in that is quite a challenge for the people I work with. So we've had to look at that and look at the existing control systems, which seem to have in a lot of cases been sidelined in order to do that quick procurement. So we know that there are going to be things coming out of that in terms of crime in the future. So that there are weaknesses in the system, weaknesses have been created in the system as a result of the work on the pandemic. A lot of work has gone into putting in due diligence processes and really trying to get on the front foot in this. But it would be naive of us to think that putting a gateway in like due diligence is actually going to stop everything. And if we're pushing money in from the Treasury into purchasing, then that's just a big red flag for fraudsters to come and look there. We've, as a organisation trying to tackle that across health, we've done a number of things, but it's only been on the surface to put out intelligence information, work collaboratively with the sector. There's been some quite good collaboration across the public sector, drawn together by the counter-fraud function, so that we could share intelligence at a high level and do some collaboration. But there is more to do, and we'll learn from this experience going forward. And now we've passed sort of the immediate massive crisis. I mean, we're still in it as such, but we're moving back into whatever people like to call this new normal. Then I think the important thing for us is to look at use our analytic capability, pull things in together so that we can actually look retrospectively at what's happened and catch up with the issues that have happened during a speedy procurement process across the NHS, and really try to look at what's worked well in terms of dealing with the crisis and look at what hasn't worked so well and take some of that forward, because this is what happens every time there's a crisis. There is fraud, we know it's there, and then we pick it up afterwards. And it would be really good to learn a lot from the process and try and turn that round so that people are on board and thinking about it as we go into a situation, rather than picking up the pieces afterwards.
Susan, thank you very much indeed. And just to the audience, don't forget, do get your questions in early. We move very fast on this webinar. Use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Michael Levy, your opening statement, please.
Well, I've got this kind of wintry background deliberately because there's an economic crime winter on the horizon, and there's also a jobs and economic prosperity winter that's already starting to arrive. I think that fraud is running amok, and where there's amok, there's brass. But it's not really particularly because of COVID-19, it's because of everything else. And COVID-19 adds some dimensions of fraud to that problem. for example, the procurement issues that Susan has been discussing. There's certain identity fraud and credit issues that CIFAS is engaged with, and UK Finance. And there are some extra excuses for scams. But for example, my daughter received today a scam email. She's not quite over 75, inviting her to pay a subscription to the TV license. So obviously, whenever you've got that, those extra opportunities, people remarkably quickly adapt to that. We don't need, I think, unless we've got an operational reason for doing so, to define precisely what the size of the problem is. All we need to know is what certain sub-chunks of the system cost better than we do at the moment. The approaches being adopted and weaknesses being exploited. You know, when the government want to get money out fast, or when we need to find people who can supply PPE fast, then we tend to take shortcuts on that. And there, the most important thing is, first of all, to prevent as much as that as possible by releasing data about who's borrowing, who's getting government subsidies or not, so we can cross-check. And also, we need to try and put a stop to it as soon as possible after it's happened, because the faster we react in a preventative way or a crime money recuperation way, the less we'll lose. And that's one of the key lessons for all kinds of fraud. And the routes to better policing, we do need more police investigators. The National Cybersecurity Centre's phishing line was a very important initiative. They're rapidly dealing with a lot of malicious URLs. But we need to think about this kind of combined prevent and pursue policy across and not overpromise people.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. Much we can come back on all the opening statements so far. If you want to do that, the question answer button at the bottom of your screen, please. Okay, let's go to our final opening statement. And Mick, yours, please.
Thanks, Martin. Clearly, people know a lot about things I don't know about around fraud, etc., because that's not my specialism. So I broadened it to the subject of financial criminals and COVID-19. Three key themes for me. One is state COVID support, two is victim vulnerability, and three is criminal opportunity. On the first one, as Mike said, you've got national governments now who are making rapid, and I would say at times panic measures to support the economy, to support public health. And in doing so, I don't think they're necessarily recognising the impact that will come. I use the UK as an example, 9.3 million people furloughed. The cost of the furlough support alone will run to £100 billion. The bounce back loans, up to £50,000. Let me tell you, it's easier to get a bounce back loan than it is to order a pizza from Pizza Express. And the loans are being given out £20 billion so far. And the estimated cost of the UK alone is some 300 billion. If only 1% of that is criminal, that's 3 billion. If 10% is criminal, it's 30 billion. And there will be a huge amount of criminal activity around this somewhat panicky situation led by national governments. The kind of doomsday position we see is the public are seeing an increased demand for reassurance and goods. There's decreased mobility from criminals, therefore the criminals are forced to go online a lot more. Lockdown means there hasn't been the ordinary social mobility. The citizens become reliant more and more on digital solutions to acquire goods and services and reassurance. There is anxiety, fear and vulnerability caused by everyone recognising the COVID risk, and there is an increased supply of illicit goods. It's the perfect storm which allows vulnerability of victims and opportunity for the criminal. And in all my experience, criminals will exploit any opportunity. Well-meaning acts in the UK around VAT leniency in the EU, around carbon credit, has been exploited by the criminal activity in the UK to billions and billions of pounds. So why would they not exploit well-meaning COVID activity? There are three superb reports you could look at and many more. One is the United Nations recent report around people trafficking and slavery, which explains how COVID is going to absolutely explode the risks about exploitation of the 40 to 60 million people across the world who will be actually cast aside by the crisis. There's the Europol recent report on organised crime and the Royal United Services Institute. Really good reports, but very briefly, the Europol, for example, will highlight a number of key risk areas that will be exploited by the criminals. And these are the very quick ones, all financially driven. Cybercrime, I needn't say any more. Fraud, it's been mentioned. Counterfeit and substandard goods. Organised property crime. Drugs markets, which will become more sophisticated, and the price of drugs hasn't gone up during the COVID crisis, despite the fact you can't street deal. Modern slavery, human trafficking, and one we perhaps wouldn't have thought of around child sex exploitation and abuse. So the truth is the COVID crisis is a financial opportunity for criminals. It's a huge vulnerability for the state and for people like me and you. And colleagues have already said many of the things that could be done, but I think that's better discussed in the seminar. Thanks, Martin.
Mick, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, it's financial offenders is the focus here. That was very, very helpful. And let's get some questions started. Then we've got lots coming in. So I'm going to move pretty fast, panel, through the questions because I want to try and cover as much as I can. Let me come to you first, Nick Downing. Tio Guan 10 says, from your point of view, and you're well placed to answer this, Nick, what are the most common financial crimes during the COVID-19? And what's in high level, the ways in which they're being deterred? I think many people will be interested in that question, Nick.
So the most prominent ones that we're seeing at the moment, Nick and Mike just touched on it, you're seeing the government stimulus funds being attacked, whether it's the local authority grants, where people were putting in multiple applications and there are no checks and balances between two, or the bounce back loans, which are quite easy to get. And this is again down to limited due diligence. The deterrent question is really good because there isn't one at the moment. And that's where we have to change that narrative and make it harder, make it socially unacceptable to be, you know, to take people's money and actually start doing something about it with dedicated investigation teams. Take the money. It's about the money. So we attack their funds and turn them into poverty, then we've got some sort of chance. But without investment, that's not going to happen.
Let me come to Mike Levy on that very point, Mike. I mean, interesting point this, isn't it, about attack the money? Because I think many people, if you take the street view, would say, look, this is a common sense view. If you make sure you get the money back off them, of course it's going to make them think, but they run amok principally because they can get away with it. What's the barrier, Mike?
Well, the barriers are twofold. First of all, there's, if you like, post-conviction confiscation, which is still the norm. And it's very difficult to get an asset freezing order early enough in advance. It's costly. The government has made it easier to freeze bank accounts, etc. But it's still slow to action. So the longer it takes for something to be processed before it gets properly investigated, and let's face it, most cases never are fully investigated, the slower the processes for freezing the assets, and the slower still the confiscation. So we need to reduce that attritional time. And unfortunately, non-conviction based confiscation has become more or less a dead letter in recent years for reasons we haven't got time to go into. Law Commission has made some proposals which the government is considering in the fullness of time. But basically, we need to coin a phrase, get our asses in gear, to think about how we can make that process more likely and faster if we're going to seriously make it harder for criminals to benefit from their crimes.
Thanks, Mike. Susan, I mean, you work in the NHS, our National Health Service. Isn't this a no-brainer for you that get the money back off them? We need it in the health service. Susan.
Absolutely, we always pursue proceeds of crime and try and seize assets. Although recently we're fairly appalled by a case, a Department of Health case, where the offender went to prison, came out, and then when they did the money laundering court case, the judge said, well, you know, he'd worked for a number of years under false pretenses, but you know, he'd worked and that was a value, so the money was never recovered. We'll see where that goes on appeal, but I just think that if you're not getting the money back, then what are you doing it? Why are we doing all this fraud work if we're not actually taking the money away from the people? You know, there's something about risk and reward. If you're not going to take the money off them, then there is no risk for the individual. And in healthcare, we need that money back to deliver healthcare. So we always pursue that in some way or another.
How successful are you, though? Very, very briefly, very, very quickly, Susan.
Fairly successful with the larger criminal convictions, but as I say, there's an example of one that we've just lost, so it's not a foregone conclusion.
Okay. Mick, I'm going to come to you now. A question from Johan Duploy from South Africa, who asks about intelligence-led investigations. And again, many people out there, I think, would say, well, obviously, that's what you need. And his question is, what's the barrier to doing that well? Mick?
Well, you're right, Martin. Every investigation should be intelligence-led. They're not. Sometimes they're opportunity-led. And one of the most dangerous things sometimes is having an informant who is a criminal, because they actually will sometimes determine where the opportunity sits, which might be the best way for them getting away from opposition. But intelligence-led, the real barriers around that is intelligence isn't always evidence. Turning intelligence into evidence is extremely complicated sometimes, and every country will have its own criminal justice difficulties in the court process. Resources are a huge problem. I would say increasingly these days, the amount of knowledge, information and intelligence is overwhelming. And having advanced analytics and analysis products that can make sense of intelligence and turn it into a story that you understand and turn it into an evidential product is really difficult. The fact is, for UK policing, which is relatively under-resourced compared to many places around the world, there are so many other demands. You know, we've got a bizarre thing here where UK policing has been asked to check on COVID compliance, on mask wearing, on people who should stay at home when they come back from overseas. And at the end of the day, the issue of financial crime and fraud is not seen as a public one always. I think it's a real challenge for the mission of UK policing around, you know, the stretch and resources. And in answer to the question, yes, intelligence should always be the starting point. Turning it into the evidence is a challenge, and seeing it against competing demands of other responsibilities for the police is a huge one.
Yeah, thank you, Mick. Let me turn to Nick on the same issue. Nick, just heard there about, I mean, this has cropped up in previous webinars, Nick, about the amount of data. So on the one hand, there's this call, we need more data. And on the other hand, we've got too much, we don't know what to do with what we've got. I mean, they both seem to be stories coming through. You're right at the heart of this. Yeah. They both seem to be current issues. Where do we stand on that? And what's the solution, Nick?
So that's really interesting. At SciFest, for those who don't know, we are a data controller where we have over 6 million records on the national fraud database. So our members can search against, which actually led to £1.5 billion worth of prevention last year. So what we're doing with that data, I don't think you can ever have too much data. It's what you do with it is the question we have to answer. And we're just working with a data scientist to actually mine that data for us and make it at the touch of the button. We will find out the intelligence we need with the manual overlay then to look at the networks and get that work out quicker for people. But that's sometimes only half the picture, because our data is mainly private sector data. So from the banks, financial institutions, the insurers, you imagine if we could get public sector data and private sector data all in one place and mine that together, what a fantastic opportunity we would have then, because what the fraudsters don't do is discriminate. They will go for a public sector procurement contract and be taking an application out there for a new bank account that they're going to use for money laundering. You know, they do not discriminate in any way. So let's get a full picture. Let's have the right tools to mine that data and start using it effectively.
Yeah, but here's the point, Nick. That sounds so obvious as to be, you wonder why it's never been done before. I mean, just standing back from it, the logic of combining the two worlds seems as a...
Well, and this is where there needs to be a massive cultural change. Often the barrier to sharing and the dare to share strapline is human-made barriers rather than legal barriers. There are some legal barriers, well, let's overcome them. We've got to challenge what this status quo is, because we are losing this battle. Anyone who thinks we are not, you are wrong. Yes, we're doing some great work, and Susan said about some of the great work. And yeah, we've done 1.5 billion of prevention. That's not enough. You know, there are some simple ways that we could do far more if we've got that collective will to do it.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much indeed. Mike, let me come to you next. A question from Michael Gibbs, who's a former panelist, Mike. And he asked a good question is, okay, so is there a real danger here that organisations are going to find in a few months' time, when they start to look a bit more closely, that this move to working from home, which is being widely applauded as being very flexible and a future opportunity to think differently, is going to reveal a massive financial crime issue on the basis of offenders running amok? Mike, your thoughts on that. How likely is that?
Well, I think we will discover some special, more and more special vulnerabilities that arise from remote working. Some of it will be intimidation of individuals at home. Some of it will be more offers. The more confident criminals are, the more corrupt offers they will make. And as we pointed out, there's a little downside risk to doing that at the moment. Don't forget, though, there are some, if you like, bigger and slower to mature frauds that will happen. Frauds in the bankruptcy process, chief executives and senior financial executives doing stuff. And some of that may take a year or two to mature. As Warren Buffett said, it's only when the tide goes out that you can see who's swimming naked. So yes, we will discover a lot more of the scams that we've been vulnerable to, but the proportion of the whole will be less. I think in the procurement area and the government loan, as Mick Creedon very eloquently put it, those are going to be the real areas that when we start looking back at those data, and I hope we do, we'll see a lot of things that we should have stopped a lot earlier.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much indeed. Susan, I guess you've already mentioned some of these things. How worried are you that from a National Health Service perspective, that we haven't seen anything yet, that the organisation is going to be exposed to quite gigantic losses when it starts to calm down?
I am worried that we haven't seen anything yet. I mean, the numbers of reports are always low, but it's for sure that there is something going on underneath that we haven't seen yet, particularly because everybody's been focusing on healthcare and not necessarily thinking about fraud. I mean, for people who are in the fraud profession and people who work in that area, then we can see all these red flags popping up all over the place. You know, we need to deal with this. But actually getting people to think about that on the ground. I think one of my colleagues said earlier that, you know, getting people to actually focus on this, and is it an excuse not to focus on it? Well, I'm not sure that's the case in healthcare, because I think they are rightly focusing on healthcare, but we need to take a step back, because the more money that leaks out of the system, the less healthcare we can provide. So it's absolutely imperative in all businesses, but particularly when we all want the healthcare that the health service can provide. So it does worry me that we have not caught as much as we would have wanted through the due diligence processes that we've had in place.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to go to Darren Carter next. I'll come to Mick Creedon first, then I'll come to Mike Levy. And Darren asked a question: why is it that criminals always seem to be more advanced in their thinking around exploiting opportunities than those who prevent crime are identifying the weaknesses? Mick, is that true first?
I think there's some truth in it because they got a huge motivation. You know, they're determined to have a wealthy lifestyle without the pay-as-you-earn drudgery that many of us have gone through, and they want to do it, and they'll be very clever doing it. Now, the truth is actually, UK law enforcement agencies and around the world do a vast amount of effectively penetration testing to try and work out where the risks lie. And that's exactly the work of the National Crime Agency, Europol, Interpol, and many others. But criminals will find opportunities through very well-meaning government schemes, through private sector opportunities, and we have to be conscious of that. The type of crime that's now being dealt with, we couldn't have conceived of 20 years ago, let alone 40 years ago when I started. So this will always be. And I think the challenge is for clever academics and people in law enforcement and people involved in research to try and work out what's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years look like and get ahead. But the truth is, you know, we never, ever, ever in my youth understood the dark web, the deep web. We never understood cryptocurrency and cybercrime because it didn't exist. The world is constantly changing, and it's changing faster, not only for society and business, but also for criminality and law enforcement. So I don't think it's an indictment to say that we are following the criminal. We are trying to get ahead, but the criminals will always look for new opportunities to make money. Who would have thought criminals would make money out of horse meat? Who would have thought they'd make money out of BSE years ago? And now who would have thought criminals would exploit the opportunities of face masks designed to protect the public? But of course they will, because there's profit in it.
Mick, thanks very much for that. Mike, coming to you, I mean, Big Creed just pointed to clever academic. You're actually one who's studied offenders as well. You're this type of offender, I might add. Mike, your thoughts on this? I mean, is that question right? Are they ahead of the game? And what's the step on that?
They're ahead of the game, but they're also doing things that we've known about for a long time and have not done enough about. So I think we tend to move on to the next new thing and worry about that, which is fine, but we also need to worry about plugging the gaps in the old things. Yeah, there'll be a lot more money muling invitations to participate in money laundering schemes, but there were a lot before. You know, intelligence-led is not just about getting intelligence about what criminals we know about are up to, but also working out from data integration what schemes are afoot and trying to find the highest common factor and going after them. What are the resources for doing that? And to come back to Nick's point, you know, can we combine the private and the public resource to try and do that? So yes, they are ahead of the game. Yes, they're also ahead of the previous game because we're not dealing with enough of a proportion of the stuff that's always been going on.
Thank you very much indeed. So much we could come back to on that. Let me move on though. I want to go to Stephen Wright's question. Nick, let me come to you on this. Financial investigators are the key to attacking the money. The skills needed to be a financial investigator need to be identified early as possible. I wonder whether you could comment on how skilled investigators are in it being able to respond to modern problems. It's all moved so fast, this point's been made. So how skilled up are they, Nick? And I'll come to Susan afterwards. Nick, your thoughts first.
So my thoughts on this are financial investigators are highly skilled and they go through a robust training accredited program. That's not the answer though, because you make it a specialism, there's a smaller amount of people who can deal with it. What we need to do is have overarching training so that everyone understands and keep the specialists for the complex, because we're not moving. Our training the training in policing isn't agile enough to meet the current threat, and we have to do that, and we have to put the time and effort in to develop those people and think differently. Fraud is a prime example. You do a fraud course, you see an offender, an investigation, the focus is on fraud. Actually, you've got to open your eyes, look a bit wider and look at whatever you can prove. Every fraud, there's a money laundering, you know? So, and that is often easier to prove and quicker, and gets the same sort of penalty, and means you can recoup the money to the victim quicker. So we have to think differently. We have to think agile, and development and training is absolutely crucial.
Okay, Susan, just a few comments from you on this, please.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Nick. Financial investigators, we have them, they're really skilled and talented, and they do some really great work, but they're a small group of specialists within a larger team, and we try to integrate, but they're focused, it's a really good point. I think we should be developing all investigators. If we could train all our investigators slightly more in that area.
Okay, I'm going to come to Mick Creedon very quickly on this, because Mick, you were onto this many years ago, Mick, and we had a research study specifically on this issue. Mick, I'll just come to you for a comment, please. The skill sets of investigators, Mick.
Two really quick comments. One is the capacity of FIs in the UK is reducing, so we're seeing less FIs than we did years ago, which is not a healthy situation at a time when it's becoming more complicated. Secondly, every investigator should be thinking financially in some way, and not leave it to the specialists. But thirdly, there's been a review of the Process of Crime Centre, which accredits all FIs around the UK, police and non-police. And there's a real problem that we are not keeping up to date. The training for FIs around cryptocurrency and money laundering is effectively non-existent. We're still training them in the way the Process of Crime Act of 2003-45. So a few real issues. The question is exactly right. FIs are the answer to this, but they've got to be part of an integrated approach, and we need to have capacity, capability, skills, training, accreditation modernised.
Mick, thank you for that. That was helpful and succinct. Mike Levy, a question for you from Claire Jenkins. And it's another biggie, Mike. What's cropped up is the public don't take enough interest in economic crime. And of course, therefore, the knock-on effect is police and crime commissioners don't, the police don't, etc. How do we change the view of the public towards this? Presumably we should be, I suppose, Mike. What's the process? What's the catalyst or triggers to bringing about a change in view? Mike Levy, please.
I think the public do have anxiety, a lot of anxiety about public-facing cybercrime, but they often just don't know quite what to do, or they're sceptical that anything they do can have any effect. There's quite a bit of repeat victimization. I think the way we change people's attitude is that, first of all, we need to hammer home that this is, if you like, the normal form of crime nowadays. It's up to police and crime commissioners. They really need to divert resources away from something. It's no good people like us saying, well, we need more resources. That's true, but where's it going to come from? In the absence of a lot more resources, the Met, how much of the extra resources will they put into fraud and financial crime? That's a decision that those in charge must make, and they must make that decision and say, we're going to have less of this in order to have more economic crime thing. So it requires, I think, a change in shift to be less driven by the newspapers and more strategic about what modern policing requires.
Okay, I think that's so much we could go, isn't it? We may have a future webinars focused on some of these issues more specifically. Let me just move very quickly. Suzette Collins is talking about some of the complexity of issues. John Legg has asked, for that reason, are companies doing enough? Come to Nick Downing first. Are companies doing enough, organisations doing enough to alert people to the dangers that are ahead? So we've heard about collaboration, we've heard about skill sets. What about making the public aware that when their organisations are doing business, there are real risks for those who are doing that business? Nick?
So I think all organisations are doing something, certainly in the private sector. They will have their plans, they have their fraud protection measures. Are they doing enough, or we all can do more, is what I would say. You know, about the warning, taking preventative steps. And it goes back a bit into the last question you asked, Mike. behavioral change. We need behavioral change, and that's all of our responsibility: business, public, private sector. Something like, you know, in UK we did Green Cross Code: stop, look, listen and think. Everyone knew it. So we need the same sort of campaign. Everyone, same message, something like stop, challenge, protect. Simple messaging, people understand. Every website, every organization, all doing the same thing, and then we might stand a chance.
What's the barrier to that, Nick? Why don't we?
Because there's too much competition in my view, in this space. We need that collective view, whether it's led by government or something by the Joint Fraud Task Force, where we bring everyone together, we do that call to arms and say one campaign, key messaging, and it's got to be a sustained campaign. You know, it's worked in the past. That's what we've got to do. Prevention is absolutely key, but behavioral change is going to be the place that makes the biggest difference.
And we need, if I may say, to evaluate the effects of these educational efforts. There's been a lot of quite cursory evaluation of behavioral change in the light of these warnings. I've seen very little research that's really any good on this. I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I'll shut up now.
Well, the thing is, though, Mike, is it just a financial reason why this is not done? Or is there, you think, a reluctance to see it as important? It gets in the way of speedy responses, which we're also calling for today.
Well, the research, you mean? I think we know that the messages we're sending out are good messages. And sometimes we don't want to find out that they're not having the effects that we think they should have.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, and of course, this is some of the commercial reality, isn't it? That you know, Nick was talking about, you know, the commercial sort of reality of doing business and the need to get on with it for commercial reasons. Mick Creedon, do you see the barrier between the private and public sector being about a reluctance of the public sector to share, or the commercial sector to want to get on with making money and do their own thing? Mick, your very quick thoughts, please.
I'll be really, really quick. Firstly, I think Nick mentioned earlier around the Data Protection Act. It's one of the most difficult things we have in the UK, and the name should have been data enabling, because the public would expect, subject to safeguards, that we are sharing information between the public sector and the private sector and across the sectors when there is the right risk. The other aspect of Martin, which I think you're touching on, is there are times, and I could tell you a real quick anecdote, a friend of mine with a business turning £25 million a year, had a cyber attack, his system was destroyed completely, and rather than report it to the police, he paid a £3,000 ransom, he got all his data back and then put security in. That was part of a sequence of 150 similar. So the ransomware attack was for only 3,000, and it was 3,000 pounds paid through bitcoins, which he got on the dark web. He was more happy to do that rather than go down the report and telling the police, because telling the police would disable his business. So there is a challenge here around recognising business continuity and profit against the cumbersome mechanism of a police law enforcement investigation and prosecution, and they don't always sit together, which is one reason banks rarely tell us about their internal risk and fraud.
Wow. And there we have it, another commercial thing. Okay, thank you so much, Pan. I'm going to come to each of you very briefly, if I might, and ask you just for your final take on this. The issue is criminals running amok, to some extent at least. What is what's the headline issue here in changing attention and refocusing? Nick, your final thoughts, please. Just 10 seconds, if you wouldn't mind, Nick. We're running out of time.
So we have to treat this as a national security threat, as far as I'm concerned. This is going to absolutely destroy the economic well-being of our country and other countries. So we've got to start treating it serious and stop talking about it.
Nick, thank you. Susan?
I agree, we need to keep talking about it. We need to share data much more. We need to share across the public, private sector. We really need to be joined up on our approach to this, or we'll never beat them.
Thank you. Mike?
Sharing and quicker reaction. I think we our criminal justice system moves at a glacial speed, and we need to become much more aware more rapidly of vulnerabilities, plug them and chase the money by whatever means.
And finally, it seems perhaps to give you, Mick, the final word. Your final thoughts, please. Just 10 seconds, Mick, if you wouldn't mind.
My final word would be leadership. We need leadership. We need political leadership and then leadership across the whole spectrum. But quite frankly, Martin, I've done 5 weeks full-time work on COVID, and without overstating it, we're being led by children in panic at the minute. And we need people at the highest level to recognise exactly what Nick said and what everyone else said. But this needs a coordinated approach and recognition of the impact. Leadership.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you to all the panel for their comments. Someone wrote to me recently and said, the great thing, Martin, about the webinars is you always leave us wanting more. My goodness me, haven't we done that today? So my very grateful thanks to Altia-ABM for sponsoring it and for supporting it. An absolutely engaging conversation. To remind you all, there'll be a blog that we'll put on the website tomorrow and a copy of this recording so other people can refer to it. Just to remind people around the world that Oscars are still open in Kenya, Germany, UK and Romania, but in particular, the Tackling Economic Crime Awards. Entries are open in the UK until the 1st of September. And in this area of tackling the threat posed by economic offenders, the issues are stark. The need has never been greater, perhaps. And certainly we need to know who are those who are doing a really good job. So if you're involved in any aspect of economic crime, I'd encourage you, please, make one nomination, take the time to recognise who the outstanding performers are. Finally, just to say, we go through it all over again on Thursday. We're here every Tuesday and Thursday, not just till the end of August, but all the way through September and October too, more webinars being planned. And on Thursday, we're going to be talking about technology and when things go wrong, being honest about technology. So it's very easy to talk about the successes. We're going to be asking people who supply technology, why is it going wrong? And what do you think the reasons are? So I hope you'll join my panel then for another thoughtful discussion. Just to say, once again, thank you to Christine and Hannah in the background. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you, the audience, for asking questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody. Hopefully we'll see you on Thursday, if not soon after. Until then, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.